Welcome to the Amplify RJ podcast. I'm David Ryan Barcega Castro-Harris, all five names for all the ancestors. Today I'm breaking down restorative justice not just as a program that you run when something breaks down, but as a way of being with each other. Restorative justice is a philosophy and set of practices rooted in indigenous values of interconnection, and it belongs in the places we actually live our lives, our schools, our workplaces, our families, and our communities. A lot of my recent work has been with schools and organizations, sitting with leaders and educators, training and keeping circles, facilitating processes, helping people build this way of being into the cultures that they're responsible for. This is the first episode in a series of restorative classrooms beyond behavior management. Teacher prep programs train teachers to manage behavior long before anyone teaches them to build community. They hand new teachers the tools, clip charts, names on the board with check marks next to them, or the ability to refer someone to the office when the check marks runs out. These tools come from somewhere real. You can't teach 30 kids in a room that's coming apart, and teachers don't get planning periods to go figure out all the relational stuff. So they reach for the tools that they have or the things that they experienced when they were growing up. And these tools are mostly about compliance. In my practice, managing behavior and building a community where kids actually belong are two totally different things. Managing a room can hold together for a while, but it runs on the adult's energy. And the second a kid decides a consequence isn't worth it anymore, there's nothing left to reach for but more escalation. A restorative classroom starts somewhere else. Not with a better consequence system, but with relationships, cultivated with purpose, before anything goes wrong. The gap between managing a classroom and building a restorative environment is what this whole episode is about. My hope is that by the end, you'll be able to tell the difference between a room that's being held together by rules and one where kids actually belong, and have some strategies to get started in your context. Even with 30 kids, no planning period, and a couple of students who just don't want to be there, this is about applying these frameworks to real conditions with real students. So let's get into it. When people hear restorative classroom, most of them picture a circle after a fight. And I get it, that's the most visible part of the work. But if that's where your classroom restorative practice starts, you're already behind. A restorative classroom is built before conflict, not in response to it. And the way that it gets built is specific. It's not a vibe, it's not a general sense that you care about your kids. There are specific intentional moves that most teacher prep programs never cover. Most teachers care about their students, but caring and knowing them are not the same thing. In a restorative classroom, relationships aren't something that happen. It's something that you have to build on purpose every day before you need them in a crisis. Most teachers go into this work because they genuinely care about kids. I'm not questioning whether or not they care, but caring about students and actually knowing them are two different things. You can be in the same room with 30 kids for 6 hours a day, 9 months a year, and still not know them. Knowing them means that you have information that only comes with practice. You know which student needs 5 more minutes before they're ready to engage. You know who shuts down when they get called on cold. You know who walks in Mondays exhausted because they were taking care of their 4 younger siblings all weekend. That kind of knowing doesn't come from instinct or goodwill. It comes from structure. Check-ins at the start of class, a simple question where you actually get to listen to their answers. Circles where students get to speak and be heard outside of content. Asking real questions and waiting for real answers instead of performatively moving through them. Creating one-on-one moments of connection that have nothing to do with instruction can go a long way. But a restorative classroom isn't just about the relationship between a teacher and students, it's about the relationships that students have with each other. The teacher has to build those too, on purpose, or at least set the conditions for them. Pair students across social lines, create structures where kids learn things about each other that wouldn't come up in a lesson. Those relationships are what make community real. When harm happens later, the question isn't just how did you affect the teacher or the rule, it's how did you affect the people that you've been in community with. Relationship is the infrastructure, community agreements, accountability processes, and repairing conflict. None of that functions without it. You can't build infrastructure after the building is on fire. You have to build it before, consistently, and on purpose. Intentional relationships are the foundation, but a foundation isn't a community. Community is what happens when those relationships get structured, practiced, and deepened over time, before anything goes wrong. Most schools treat restorative justice as something you do in response to a problem. A fight happens, a kid gets hurt, the climate feels off, and someone calls for a circle or restorative conversation. Those processes are important, but they can't do what they're being asked to do if the community wasn't already there. Think about what a circle actually requires. It asks people to speak honestly about what happened and how it affected them. It asks people who caused harm to sit with the impact of what they did. It asks people who were hurt to be in the same room as the person who hurt them. None of that is possible without a baseline of trust. And trust doesn't get built in the circle, it gets built in the hundreds of small moments before the circle ever happened. The educators who struggle the most with restorative processes are rarely struggling with the structure of a restorative process. They're trying to get the fruit of accountability and healthy relationships from the branches of restorative processes without having a strong trunk of proactive practices and soil in roots of restorative values. Community gets built through consistent, low stakes practice. Weekly circles where the question has nothing to do with conflict, check ins that give students a real way to say how they're doing, communal agreements that students actually help write, so the norms in the room belong to everyone, not just the teacher. These aren't add ons, they're the work. That's how a group of people who happen to share a classroom become a community that can hold something hard. You don't build that capacity just by deciding to have it, you build it by practicing consistently. It becomes how the room operates as a default. Build a community, and the kids show up differently, not just with conflict, but to each other, to correction, and to the room itself. We've talked about building relationships on purpose and building community before you need it, and both of those require structure. Where that structure comes from and who gets a hand in building it. Most classrooms have rules. Some schools hand teachers a student handbook and let them enforce it. Others paint values on the wall: respect, responsibility, integrity, excellence, and point to them when something goes wrong. Posting values on a wall and handing students a list of consequences has never built restorative culture in any room anywhere. When those rules get enforced, they don't get enforced evenly. Some kids get written up, some get a warning, and some exhibit the same behavior with no consequences. And everyone notices. In my practice, communal agreements are one of the first things a restorative classroom builds together. Not handing down rules, but making agreements. They come out of a conversation about what everyone in the room actually needs from each other. And that conversation is part of what builds the community. Everyone in the room becomes accountable to something they helped create. The process matters just as much as the product. When you ask students what they need to feel safe in the room, what they need to learn, and what they need from each other, you get information that you couldn't get any other way. You find out what they're actually carrying. You find out what has happened to them in other classrooms, what they liked and what they didn't like. They get to find out about each other and about you. When kids have ownership of a space, it gets protected differently than a managed space. When a student has a hand in building the culture of a room, the culture belongs to them. When something threatens it, they have a reason to care that has nothing to do with whether the teacher is watching. That's the difference between a classroom that holds together because an adult is maintaining it and one that holds together because the people in it have built something worth protecting. Student ownership doesn't push the teacher out of the room. The teacher's still in the room, still responsible for what happens there. The question is whether they're in it as a manager or a member of the community. Students can have ownership over the culture of a room, but that only works if the teacher is actually in community with them, not standing outside or above them running it. But what does that mean in practice? That means teachers are active members of the community too. A lot of restorative justice training positions teachers as the facilitator, the ones that hold the circle, ask questions, manage the process. But there's a version of that that keeps the teacher permanently outside the community that they're trying to build. Students are perceptive. They know when an adult is performing care versus actually being present. They know when a check-in is a technique and when the teacher actually wants to know the answer. They know when the person running the circle would never sit in it themselves. Being a member of a community doesn't mean collapsing the distinction between teacher and student. The teacher still holds responsibility for what happens in the room. Their role is to model, participate, and facilitate learning. Students are not carrying adult responsibilities, but everyone has a role, and the teacher's role is played within the community, not above it. Teachers are human, they have needs, and students, even young ones, are capable of caring about that when teachers are honest about it. That means that teachers model the vulnerability they're asking students to display. When the circle asks what everyone needs, the teacher answers honestly. When something hard happens, the teacher names how it affected them. When the room agrees that people get to finish their thoughts without being interrupted, this applies to the teacher too. Care goes in both directions, not just from adult to kid. You can't ask students to be open in a room where the adult is closed off. This requires something of the teacher that doesn't come free. Knowing when you're running at low capacity, being honest about it, and asking for what you need, sometimes that's harder than facilitating a circle. But it's also what makes the circle real. A teacher who can do that isn't just teaching restorative justice, they're embodying it. A community with intentional relationships built before conflict, shaped by students in it, held by a teacher who belongs in it, that's the foundation for a restorative classroom. But what happens when harm enters the community? Because it will. And what does accountability ask for everyone involved? Most people think accountability means students suffer an appropriate consequence. But punishment and accountability are not the same thing, and confusing them is what makes so many discipline systems fail. But you can't actually hold someone accountable. Accountability isn't something done to a person, it's something that a person does. And a person can only do it in relationship with people that they've agreed to be in community with. Outside of that, it's just punitive enforcement. That's why everything we've talked about in this episode isn't just the warm up work. The relationships built on purpose, the community shaped before conflict, the agreements everyone helped create, those aren't preliminary. They're what makes accountability possible at all. When a student causes harm in a room where they know the people they hurt, where they helped write the agreements they broke, the question of repair lands differently. It lands personally because they're not answering to a rule book, they're answering to their community. When I hold you accountable in this context, what I'm saying is, I care about you enough to not let this go. I know the good, wise, powerful person you are. I know what you agree to, and I'm not willing to let you keep harming yourself and others because I know you're capable of something different. There's work for you to do, but I'm going to support you through it. That's what accountability in a restorative classroom actually asks. Not what punishment fits the infraction, but what happened, who is impacted and how, what needs must be addressed in order to make things right as possible, and how can the community support each other in moving forward together. The consequence isn't something that an authority figure hands down, it's something that the community works out. And that process, done well, is what restores the community instead of just managing an individual's behavior. If this landed for you, drop a like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this series. The next episode is going to explore why building community before conflict happens isn't just a nice idea, but the thing that makes everything else in this work possible. And if you want to tap into more learning about restorative justice, visit amplifyrj.com. Until we connect next, may you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live with ease, and may you work for a world where this can be possible for everyone. Peace.